Women who are committed to the end simply don't exist, with very few exceptions. Every man knows it. One man worries about it, one man makes peace with it, and one man tries his best to ignore it. I've been with my wife for almost 40 years. We got married when I was 20 and she was 19. We fought and made up, but I was sure we never betrayed each other. Wherever fate threw me, she was always there for me. We have 2 beautiful children, a son named Paul and a daughter named Katie. They are grown up and have their own families and children. I was sure we had a peaceful old age surrounded by beloved grandchildren. I'm a doctor. I served 25 years in the Army, reached the rank of colonel in the medical service, and have been retired for 10 years. Well, retired is a strong word. Today I continue to work in a private clinic, but I rarely hold a scalpel. Age takes its toll, but I still see patients. My wife Ann still works at an advertising firm. She's a designer. To say we had financial difficulties would be untrue. We just worked for our own pleasure. During my service, I traveled to many places, Africa, Mongolia, and Vietnam. But I didn't see much of those countries. A doctor's work is almost round the clock, especially as a military doctor. Every time I came home, I knew I had a loving wife and children waiting for me. At least I thought so. Alas, it was just wishful thinking. Despite her age, my wife managed to retain her natural beauty. She always looked after herself, keeping her youthful figure and a face without a single wrinkle. When we walked side by side, she was mistaken for my much younger companion. This amused Anne and flattered me, but it turns out I was having fun for nothing. It all happened one rainy November evening. Have you ever noticed that the events that change our lives for the worse often happen on rainy fall evenings? It's like nature's dying to drag us down with it. It was late fall, and the cold wind was driving the rain into trickles on the window pane. I was sitting at the kitchen table, going through my medical records. I had a medical examination on Monday and needed to find my vaccination card. Anne wasn't home. She had gone into town to buy groceries and prepare Sunday dinner. As I went through old documents, some yellowed certificates, I found something that shocked me. It was an extract from my wife's medical book, dated just after a period when I was on a long business trip and hadn't been home for almost a year. 4 years after Katie's birth, it referred to Anne's pregnancy and premature birth. The tests and ultrasound results showed she had a premature 6-month-old baby who died after 3 days. The blood group and Rh factor tests indicated the baby had type O blood and a negative Rh factor. I was stunned. There was no way I could be the father of that baby. Anne and I both have type A blood and a positive Rh factor. The baby couldn't have been mine because I wasn't in the country at the time. I stared blankly at the transcript for a long time, unable to collect my thoughts. Anne had been unfaithful to me while I was away, gotten pregnant, and almost had a baby. But from whom? Half an hour ago, I was sure I had a strong family, a loving wife, and a clear future. Now, all I saw behind me were ruins. Finally, I managed to pull myself together. I carefully put the certificates back in their place. The most important thing was to stay calm and not get too excited. The fact that Anne cheated on me was documented. Honestly, I wanted to confront her as soon as she came back, but I needed to sort things out first. Our children, Paul and Katie, were clear. They were 9 years apart and both had type A blood. They both resembled me when I was young, as much as children can look like their father. I had no doubt I was their father, but it didn't make me feel any better. I couldn't understand why she did this to me. We were married for love. I spent almost a year courting her. I didn't have any other women, even though I was good-looking and got plenty of attention from the opposite sex. There was only one woman for me all my life, my Anne. Throughout our life together, I tried to surround my wife with care and attention. Sometimes I felt like I'd never had that other single life. My wife was everything to me and more. And then this happened. I went out on the balcony for a breath of fresh air. I looked down and in the dim light of a street lamp saw a car pull up outside our driveway. After a while, my wife Anne jumped out, followed by a man. He opened the back door and took out some packages. Anne gave him a quick peck on the cheek, took the packages and went into the house. The man got into the driver's seat and the car slowly drove away. The front door clicked open. "Mark, you're home!" Anne's voice sounded unexpectedly loud. and I realized that I couldn't stand it and I'd start to find out what was going on right now. I came from Marcia's to talk about things. Anne's voice didn't express any emotion. Well, we've been sitting too long. Now I'll quickly get dinner ready. Why do you look so upset? She kissed me on the cheek and I smelled the fresh scent of alcohol. Don't wrinkle your nose. I had a little champagne, she said, wiping the lipstick off my cheek. So she gave you a ride. I tried my best to speak calmly. Anne looked at me with a strange look as if she didn't know how to answer me. Mark, don't get too excited. I came by cab. Or rather, I got a ride from an acquaintance, she said, frantically searching for the right answer. What's the problem? She asked. It must have been a very close acquaintance since you kissed him goodbye, I said, my heart pounding so hard I thought the neighbors could hear it. To occupy myself and calm down, I got up and took a full bottle of whiskey from the locker. Anne looked at me fearfully. How do you know? She asked. I was standing on the balcony and saw you saying goodbye to the driver, I replied, trying to stay calm and not scream. I poured myself a whiskey. Sit down, I have some questions for you. I pulled a stool out from under the table and took out my briefcase with the unfortunate transcript. Explain this, I said, putting the document in front of her. She carefully turned a few pages and quickly pulled her hand away. Where did this come from? Anne raised her eyes at me, which began to fill with tears. What did you read, Anne? Who got you pregnant? What happened? I asked, unable to bring myself to drink. She was silent for a while, then she said in an unexpectedly calm voice. It had to happen sometime, and maybe it's a good thing it did. Now, she said in a steady, calm voice, in your absence, which was very long, I met a young man. He was 11 years younger than me. It was like an obsession. I couldn't help myself. First, we went on dates, then I took the kids to my mom's, and he moved into our apartment with me. We lived as husband and wife, and from these sessions of unearthly love, I got pregnant. He asked me to marry him. Anne continued. In a love stupor, I even secretly hoped that you wouldn't come back at all. Then everything would work itself out. We'd get married and be together. But something didn't work out. The baby was born prematurely and died 3 days later. At this point, she burst into tears. I guess I didn't care about the rest of the children. We grew cold and distant from each other, she said. Then a young woman appeared on the horizon, and my lover finally left me in pursuit of new adventures. After some time of worrying, I took the children and waited for you to return. I met you as if nothing had happened, and for the next few years, I diligently played the role of a loving and caring wife. I was shocked. Honestly, I lost the ability to think and speak for a while. I just stared at the wall in silence. But that wasn't all. 6 months ago, her soulmate showed up in our town. The passion was rekindled. It turns out she'd been in love with him all these years, and my wife fell into his arms like an overripe plum into mud. So they've been seeing each other all this time, and she wants to start a new life. Alas, there's no room for me. She's been with me for 40 years. She's given me the best years. And now that the kids are grown up, she wants to start over with the man she loves. With every word she said, she was killing me for a second. She reminded me of an executioner indifferently doing his job. It's nothing personal. It's love. That's the way it is. Now we can all exhale and drink. What happened next was I poured the whiskey again and drank it down. It's a strange drink. It doesn't get me at all. Maybe I sneezed. I took the bottle and looked at the light. No, the color is normal. It's light brown, like an aged Irish whiskey should be. I get it. I just need to pour more. What am I really doing? Maybe I shouldn't pour it. Maybe just drink straight from the bottle. Anne sat opposite me and was silent. Well, she spoke so smoothly, clever girl, scamming me for so many years. If I hadn't found the extract, I probably would have continued not knowing anything. Well done, a real hereditary woman. I got up, pushed the stool with my foot, and went into the bedroom without saying a word. I got dressed, threw some things in a bag, and without saying a word, went to the exit. Mark, her half-question hung in the air. You don't have to go out at night. I looked at her. Her figure stood out in a dark silhouette against the background of the kitchen doorway. You won't tell me anything, she said, as if she was about to cry. Poor girl was so nervous. I shrugged, opened the door, and went out, trying not to slam it. Autumn was waiting for me on the street. I took a deep breath of the damp air, threw the bag over my shoulder, and slowly wandered along the sidewalk strewn with yellow leaves. I really wanted to smoke. I even patted my pockets just in case, but of course I didn't find anything. I quit smoking 20 years ago at Anne's request. She was very concerned about my health and longevity. It was already quite late. The city was trying to forget itself in an uneasy sleep. The windows of the houses were almost dark, and only the lanterns cast dim light on the almost deserted streets. Anne called me. She was worried about me. I turned off the phone. Suddenly, such melancholy came over me that I clamped my teeth on the collar of my coat to not cry out. Out of despair, I realized what had happened. I even shook my head, as if I could drive away the thoughts that were killing me. What to do? Where to go? The easiest way was to slam the door and leave with my head held high. But where to go? To the children? They already had enough problems. I never had a lover in vain, only for work. Like on duty, turn over overnight and pick up tomorrow for a final decision. I walked slowly past the black houses, trying not to slip on the wet fallen leaves. "Hey man, got a cigarette?" I turned around and fell into the darkness. A bright light burst into my eyes as if a special forces platoon had barged in. "Well, finally," said a male voice very close to me. I turned my head with difficulty. "Welcome back, Mark." My boss, without hiding his joy, looked at me. Words came to me with difficulty. "Yes, you're in our clinic tonight, taken to the emergency hospital with a traumatic brain injury. You had documents with you and they called us. We took you away and immediately operated on you. The operation was successful and you are back with us. We told your children and wife. Your son is already on his way. The investigator promised to come by after lunch." "My wife?" I asked. Recent events forced my heart to squeeze. "Wife? I don't have a wife anymore." The door to the room creaked. "Dad, hello, how are you feeling?" My son Paul kissed me on the cheek. "You made us nervous." He carefully placed a package on the nightstand. "Here are some fruit and other juices, but they're not allowed yet." Paul straightened my blanket. "Mom couldn't come. She has urgent matters." "She doesn't need to come," I said. "Okay, just don't worry." It seemed Paul knew everything about our breakup. I wondered what Anne had told him. What do ex-wives say in such situations? He didn't love me, he didn't care for me, he killed me. I was discharged from the hospital. Anne came to visit me twice, but I refused to meet with her. The past doesn't count. For the first time, I rented a small apartment not far from the clinic where I worked and began to get used to being single. The breakup with my wife had two effects on me. On one hand, there was the pain from betrayal, and on the other hand, some still unclear prospects. The only thing I knew for sure was no new connections with women. The vaccination against new relationships was tough. Then there was a divorce, and I was left not only without a wife, but also without my home. The children took a neutral position, but it was clear they were more on their mother's side. At work, I started operating again, trying to drown out my spiritual pain, and I succeeded. I didn't get drunk like abandoned husbands sometimes do. About 2 months later, an old friend called me and asked to meet. "Mark, remember a few years ago I borrowed a large sum from you?" He started the conversation. I remembered. 3 years ago, Will borrowed a considerable amount of money from me. He had serious problems with his business, and there was no one else to ask for help. I had just sold my mother's apartment and had the money. Giving it to my friend, I didn't set a deadline for repayment, understanding that he couldn't return the money immediately. Will improved his affairs, but he was in no hurry to repay the debt. I understood that if I asked about the debt, I would lose my friend. My father always said, "When you lend money to a friend, imagine you are giving it to him. If you value this person, don't remind him of the debt. The time will come and he will repay it himself if he can." "Thank you for helping me out then. Now I'm back afloat." "My business is going more than successfully," continued Will. "I invested your money in the business and today it brings good dividends." He handed me a bank card. "This is my debt with interest. The amount is 5 times more than the one you lent me then." The money was very useful. I bought myself a small cottage near the city and a car. I had no time to do housework, so I hired an assistant. She was younger than me by almost 15 years, a fairly young woman who had been married to her ex-husband for almost 20 years. They didn't have children because of her infertility, and her husband eventually left her for another. A neighbor told me all this. Amber didn't talk much about this topic. I didn't have any plans for her, no more. It went on for 6 months. One day I was chopping wood and felt a terrible headache and lost consciousness. I regained consciousness in the hospital. Next to me, Amber was sitting on the bed. It was she who called the ambulance. When the doctors arrived, she was holding my head on her lap. Everything worked out for me. Just traumatic brain injuries, which aren't easy to recover from. But after this incident, I began to look at Amber through different eyes. I realized what a beautiful woman she was. Somehow, our relationship turned into intimacy, and one fine day, I asked her to marry me. In the fall, we got married. I knew that we couldn't have children, so I behaved freely in love with her. About 3 months after the wedding, Amber felt unwell, with vomiting and headaches. I immediately took her to my clinic. What was my surprise when it turned out that she was pregnant? I remember Amber then told me, "No matter what you say, I will keep the child." I just hugged her tightly and kissed her eyes. It was then I realized one truth. If fate closes one door in front of us, it immediately opens another. In general, life was getting better. Then one day, just before the new year, Anne called me. "We need to meet," she said with a plaintive, pleading voice. "I booked a table at the restaurant. Please come by 7 p.m., I beg you." Anne sat opposite me, expressing humility and repentance. "Mark, forgive me, I haven't gone a single day without thinking about you." Her eyes began to fill with tears. "I made a terrible mistake. I betrayed you, our family, our children." She continued to talk, and I silently looked at my once madly beloved woman, a woman I wouldn't hesitate to marry, a woman who cynically betrayed me twice, a woman who lied to me for almost 20 years, a woman who cut me out of her life and went to another man. And now she suddenly came to her senses and is trying to come back to me. Anne kept repeating that the time spent without me helped her understand how much she loves me, that only now she understands that I was the only real man in her life. For some reason, she reminded me of a siren from Greek mythology. Her words pulled me into a sleep-like state, fantasies that only I owned her heart. I'm sorry, she repeated this word like a spell. I looked at her mouth, painted with bright lipstick, which delighted my ears with such sweet words, and imagined how she kissed and caressed her lover with it. Does she really think that I will believe her words, that she is confused or didn't know what she wanted? This woman who cheated on me, gave birth to a child from her lover, left me, and spent her free time with another man, never thought about me. She came back because it turns out she loved only me. At one time, she found an excuse for her meanness and left me without hesitation. She managed to fully receive sensual pleasure with her lover, having been in his bed more than once, and calmly planned the moment to deal me the final fatal blow. And now she's here to offer me the only valuable thing she has left, but with all her might already used by her lover. She realized that he needed her only for entertainment, and as long as she had money, that she could not have a future with him, that now she has no one to financially insure her. Having realized all this, she crawled to me and hoped to try to return what was lost. Lord, do I really seem so stupid to her that I am ready to believe all her lies? I listened to her full repentance monologue. I had nothing to say to her. I didn't revel in her humiliation and didn't gloat. I even felt kind of sorry for her. After all, 40 years together. But it was time to end our meeting, and at that moment my phone rang. Amber called and told where to pick her up. I got the address and began to say goodbye. "Is this your woman?" Anne asked quietly, looking at me with eyes full of tears. "Yes." "And you have been together for a long time?" "Yes. This has been happening for almost a year and a half now." I got up. "Goodbye, Anne. Try to be happy." Leaving the restaurant, I turned around. Anne stood with her hands pressed to her chest and looked at me through the festively decorated showcase. Around me, people were bustling and rushing somewhere. I got into the car and turned the ignition key. The engine purred smoothly and peacefully. I turned left and after a few seconds joined the traffic of cars hurrying somewhere, leaving Anne in the past like this whole story.